So this is what Rabindranath Tagore, one of the greatest minds of India and the first Nobel laureate to Asia, he talked about just the time when the Second World War was happening, and he said the civilization is wonderful, but there's a crisis. So he said something which is really evident today. If you look at the world today, there is indeed a crisis. There is technology, but the technology is not that humane. There is science. The science is disconnected from social science. There is progress, but the progress is not really defined as far as distribution of services and resources are concerned. So the internal expectations are not matching the external. So there are books which has really responded to this. I think one book is very important. That's on the top right. Everybody must read that book if you want to understand sustainable development, written by Carolyn Merchant, historian of science from University of Berkeley, California. And these are some of the other books. I mean, they all ratify which I have just said in the last 4 or 5 minutes. The problem of reductionism, yeah, and the need of holism, which is actually the way to sustainable development. So this is what is recognized in the West right now. But we Indians are still skeptical and we are still thinking whether we should. So this knowledge of non-linear dynamics has been used by a great author, Fritjof Capra, a book which has sold more than 7 million copies in the 80s. And I was there in the US, I got a copy. And today is a Bible of India and the West. And this was again used by Prijojain and Glansrow for the Nobel Prize book, where they use the symbol of Mahakala, the dynamics of space, time, and causation. And in 2004, Dr. Anil Kakotka, the chairman of DST, was invited by CERN in Switzerland to present a statue of Natarajan, which is essentially from the south, the southern iconography, which shows the relationship between Agni and Soma, the fire and water, Amrita, maintaining the life cycle of the world as a symbol of quantum sciences, quantum physics, quantum chemistry, quantum biology, quantum electrodynamics, and quantum computing, and all that is going to become quantum with AI in the next 5 years and 10 years. So what is so ancient is still so modern. Why? Because Indian knowledge systems is essentially sustainable, because it has reached the highest to come down to the lowest. There's no other country which has done that. They have just come up to the cultural level, material, moral, cultural, but they have never penetrated the culture to go into the spiritual, the cosmic, the deep ecological system. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, once again. And I really feel proud to be a part of this gathering at NIT Calicut, because I have various friends there, some of my own students who are doing very well in that institute, and things are happening very well for NIT Calicut. So when the students reflect the glory of a teacher, so it's a connection between the past and the future through the present. So that is something which is very important to understand in sustainable development, where there is the element of time, which is just not linear, but it's also non-linear, because the past teacher was also a very distant student of someone else in the very remote past. So the same pattern repeats again and again. The general progression is linear. It goes like a line, a linear programming. But the same pattern repeats itself with various intensities. It's like a cyclic repetition, a non-linear repetition in a linear programming. So this is actually the crux of Indic traditions, Indian traditions, Indian knowledge systems. And what has happened till date is that because of our over-obsession with industrial revolution in the last 300 years, we have actually gone for a development which is very good, but it has not been very holistic, and it has not networked the connections between nature, environment, ecological systems and the demands of good humanity. So that's why most of the development has been very unsustainable. So this is my presentation, and I'll keep it very simple. There's some small semantics and theoretical knowledge, but there is also a bit of practical things which I'll share with you. I think this presentation will be of a slightly different kind than other presentation, because I was sure that there are other esteemed speakers who are talking directly on sustainable development and the environmental concerns. So based on my little experience with Indic traditions, Indological studies, and Indian knowledge systems, I have developed some kind of an understanding over the last 25, 30 years. In fact, it extends to my days at Iowa State. So I'm not getting into all that. So let's move on. So I think there are three questions which I'll try to answer with you, answer to you, which is, I mean, why we need a recovery of Indian knowledge systems. That is going to be the first part. And then once I do that, I'll move very quickly to the second part, which is what exactly we are talking about when it comes to sustaining. You know, it's like a non-linear dynamics going round and round, so that the relationship between habitat, which is human-built environment, and human habits, the way we build our human-built environment, the way we use it, the way we look at it, there is a complementarity between the two. So human habits, which is an internal world, needs to be connected with the human habitation, which is an external world. So if you have to sustain development, we need a connection between the internal world and the external world. The slightly unfortunate thing that has happened in the last 250 years, because of a reductionist approach to development, the internal world has been largely neglected. I mean, we have mostly been driven by fruits and profits and successes at the external world. So let's move on, and then probably towards the end, I'll try to give you some ideas of how we can do it, which I think other speakers have already been sharing with you, and there'll be more speakers after me. So I can be quite assured about it. So let's move on. Yeah, so this is a quotation from a very important work on cosmology, which is by one of the forerunners of Indian knowledge systems. I think his presence in the world and India about 130 years back made a big difference, which is, and I think you can see his name below. So this is a complementarity and a lack of complementarity between the external and the internal world. So normally we need a harmony between the internal and external world. So there are certain times when they're in harmony. So when there's an harmony, we call it a golden age, Krita Yoga, as per Indic traditions. There's nothing gold about it, but the relationship between the internal and the external world is of a golden kind. It's a golden relationship. If you go to Auroville, you see the Matri Mandir, which is built with a golden color, Hiranya Garbha. It's a golden color. So gold symbolizes the Krita Yuga, the Satya Yuga, which is just not about time, but it's about the quality of relationships. But what happens, there is a entropy over time, and then we descend to lower and lower ages. And in the Iron Age, there is a disconnect. So the complementarity between the two worlds almost becomes like a conflict. And we are right now at the highest state of conflict. And I'll share the next 5, 6, 7 slides are exactly on the conflict, and they're nothing new to you. All I have done is just put them into a few pieces of truth, which is already evident in the great works. So let's move on. So these are some of the conflicts, because of the reductionist approach. Most of the development that we have done, the way we have built our cities, the way we have built our airports, the way we are overbuilding our cities, the way we are overbuilding our airport because of increasing accesses to flights and affordability of the general mass, there is a lopsidedness or an imbalance between the demand and the supply. And these problems are essentially of 4 kinds. I'll start with economic from below to geopolitical, climate, and social culture. So let's have a look. So this is what Rabindranath Tagore, one of the greatest minds of India and the first Nobel laureate to Asia, he talked about just the time when the Second World War was happening. And he said, The civilization is wonderful, but there's a crisis. So he said something which is really evident today. If you look at the world today, there is indeed a crisis. There is technology, but the technology is not that humane. There is science. The science is disconnected from social science. There is progress, but the progress is not really defined as far as distribution of services and resources are concerned. So the internal expectations are not matching the external demand and supply, just looked at it at econometrically. So the ecological portion of this relationship is quite missing. So because of that, there is a decay, and you can see Paul Krugman, one of the Nobel laureates. So he had predicted that based on Malthus. What happens because of this disconnect? There is a disconnect between the growth of population and the growth of resources, food, habitat, health services, education, the indicators of human development. So today, in fact, one of my first research scholar about 15 years back, she did a PhD. She's working with the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, Dr. K.R. Chakrabarti, and she did a work on the income-driven HDI. It was a very new topic about 15 years back. Today, it's very much everywhere. So based on this, there is a disconnect and something beyond this line. Okay. So from here, there is a bifurcation. There's a bifurcation. Yeah. So what happens? The gap increases more and more. So even though we have a lot of resources, but the resource is not, the allocation location theory of resources is not well defined. So that's why development becomes unsustainable. How? Because there are about 4 problems. The first problem is economics. So this is Jose Stiglitz, The Price of Inequality. He's one of the greatest economists ever born in the last 20, ever contributory in the last 20, 25 years. So there's a huge demand and supply mismatch. If you read the statement in red below, you can see, how development is there, but it's just in the position of a growth. There's so much of imbalance around the world because the concentration of wealth is just in the handful of a few people, whereas the others are deprived. The second problem is geopolitical, and this is a picture that comes from 20 years back. And even today, this picture is problematic. I'm not getting into the detail. We really don't know how many times these 2 countries have shaken their hands, and the very next day, it's something else. And today, the whole world is in a crisis because of the impacts of this geopolitical. Because the development is not sustainable enough, to actually create good relationships and networking. Communication is a very important thing. No matter however good business, technology and growth you're having, you should have the skills and the business of good communication, which is so important. So this is a second crisis. The third crisis is, I think, the biggest crisis, which is closest to the theme of this conference, which is climate. And when I was a student in the US, I used to read his books. He later became the US vice president, and he made a movie for which he got partial Nobel Prize, The Inconvenient Truth. And about 40 years back, people laughed at him. I think today, no one will laugh at him. Everybody will dare to laugh at him. This is Vice President Al Gore. And he said and predicted some of the things which we are seeing around the world. You can see the pictures. Fire in cold places and water in deserts and huge suspended particulate matter, pulmonary problems, and fibrosis of the lungs everywhere in different parts of the world. It's one of the largest disease which is taking up the generation, especially in the post-COVID times. It's huge, but nothing as big as the fourth one, which is socio-cultural crisis. And somebody who pointed this out was Abraham Maslow, who worked very close to the thoughts of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo came up with this idea of the internal world, which is the hierarchy of minds. So the various minds, the tamasic mind, the rajasic mind, and the very rare swatic mind. So what is happening today? The swatic mind, the mind which looks for unification, unity of humanity, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, is missing. Though we talk about it, but we just talk in theory, but it's because we are mostly driven by a rajasic, tamasic mind. So this is interpreted in the external Hierarchy of Needs by Abraham Maslow. And Jose Vrinte has a wonderful book on Aurobindo and Maslow. I think if you're interested, you should have a look at this book, and you'll see how Indian wisdom has actually shaped the latest thoughts and constructs of environment and the way we look at environment in the West. So this is all about it. So one of the biggest problems today are lifestyle diseases. And young boys and girls are having hypertension tablets, and they have problems of sugar and so many other things. It's so unfortunate. Why? Because most of us are just cocooned to small rooms, air conditioning spaces, just working on a deep learning software or trying to put in data for 7 days without any connect with the sun, losing our circadian rhythm, the biological clock, with the rise of the sun and the rise of the moon. So the health and the hygiene of an average human being is absolutely disconnected with the overall patterns of sustainable development. So you see the four, uh, 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 what I should say, the four niches or the four centripetals of sustainable development. They form a chaturbuha of sustainable development. It's socio-cultural, political, economic, and climatic, if you take them together. Why it is so? I mean, with all respect to some of these people, they're all here, but actually the science that they produced in the last 300 years, from Bacon to Darwin to Freud to Descartes to Newton and to Marx, I mean, their contribution has been great, but they provided the world a lopsided view of reductionism and a worldview which is only driven by conflict. It's not driven by cooperation. It's not driven by emotive building. It's not driven by deep ecological systems. It's not driven by connections between nations and trusting each other. This is a problem of reductionist development in the last 250 years. So we had science, we had technology, we had growth, but actually there was not much of progress. The yawning gap between the rich and the poor, between the global north and the global south, between portions of India limited to cities and the rest of India has really expanded, and development has become unsustainable. So there are books which has really responded to this. I think one book is very important, that's on the top right. Everybody must read that book if you want to understand sustainable development, written by Carolyn Merchant, historian of science from University of Berkeley, California. And these are some of the other books. I mean, they all ratify, which I have just said in the last 4 or 5 minutes, the problem of reductionism, yeah, and the need of holism, which is actually the way to sustainable development. So that's really the most important thing. So this is actually just not architecture and planning and economics and ecology, but this is also media and movies. And I think all of you in this room perhaps have seen this movie by the director of Titanic. This is Avatar. The word comes from the Indian traditions, and most of the words in this movie, like Nabhi and Amati Kaya, they're all from Indian traditions, where it shows that the relationship of a galactic and a planetary understanding is missing, and we just go to another country or another planet to invade. So technology and science has been the tools for invasion, not assimilation. Technology and science has been the tools of conflict, not cooperation. Technology and science has been a tool for apathy, not of empathy. So these are the missing gaps which has yawned in the last 250, 300 years. So despite we have machines and computers and AI and VR and deep learning and all the softwares, but we are increasingly disconnected with nature. And hence, sustainable development is the last thing that we actually do in our lives. That is so unfortunate. That's so unfortunate. So that's why there is a revival of the knowledge system from India as an imperative today. So this comes from various books. I'm not reading, I think this slide is visible. So one of the great books to knowledge systems of India is The Foundations of Indian Culture. This is a must read before a course starts, and then Swami Vivekananda's The East and the West. And other books like The Wonder That Was India by L. Basham, The Speaking Tree, which is a column in the Times of India by Richard Lenoy. Before we start other books, and the great pointers by Will Durant, Max Muller, Roma Lola, Arnold Toynbee, and many more. So that's my part one. Now I'll move a little faster. So what exactly we are talking about in this recovery of sustainable development? The syntax, the elements of design that will shape sustainable development. I mean, it doesn't remain in theory, but we practice, we build, and we make the change. As Gandhiji said, you be the change that you like to see outside. So he first talks about an internal world and then an external world. Amos Rappaport, one of the greatest architects, he said, one changes rather than changing the environment. I can only build a temple if I have the mind to build a temple, if I know what exactly is a temple, because a temple is mandiram, which means in Sanskrit, jaha jaha manasthiram, taha taha mandiram. So the temple is not a building, it's a place where the mind becomes calm and quiet, and it becomes swatik. It elevates from the rajasic and the tamasic. And a scientist becomes a swatik scientist. A doctor becomes a swatik doctor. An architect becomes a swatik architect. So that is a change that has to come to our educational pedagogy. Otherwise, all seminars, conferences, books will be a waste. And that is more or less happening in different institutes and universities around the world. There are a lot of intellectual discussions, but that intellectual discussion has not penetrated the intuitive, because we are mostly in the extuition. We are mostly outside. We are trying to move inside, but we never take a turn to come from inside to outside. So that is the foundation of Indian knowledge system. So what exactly are the most important things? I'll just go through things a little fine. So James Cameron gives the same response in the same movie, and he says it's not conflict, it's cooperation. It's not fighting with each other, it's symbiosis. It's not isolated movement, but it's the swarm. Like a group of birds fly in the sky, humanity and nations and religions and sciences have to move together, not hate each other, because we have created more divide and rule in this world. But at the same time, we are talking about sustainable development. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely more than ridiculous. I think everybody is getting me. And this is what he shows. So we need an avatar's mind, a swatik mind, who understands the sensitivities and the deep syntaxes of the man-human nature relationship. That's symbiosis. Yeah, so that takes us uh, to the journey from a linear to the non-linear. We think A is science, that's the left brain, and we think B is history and arts and meditation. There's no relationship, but we really don't know that the A and B are nothing else but the projection of a single C, which is the cycle. So when the cycle is going down, it's coming to the material level, which is science and technology. When the same cycle is going up, is going to the intuitive, philosophical, and not just as philosophy, but as a way of life, which is contemplation, meditation, yoga, and Maha-yoga. So these are the foundation, the structural foundations of sustainable development. Because if we don't design our engineers and architects with a good mind, the beautiful mind, the movie by Russell Crowe, which is John Nash, the game theory cooperation, then who is going to design sustainable development? Sustainable development can be only designed by people who has a sustainable mind. So the internal world determines the external worlds. So much of our books and approach and pedagogy has to change. So this is the whole linear pedagogy has to be cyclic. I'm moving a little faster, and it has to touch the various levels, the various levels of relationship between the physiological needs at the grassroots and the self-actualization at the top. So these are fantastic things which is done by Maslow, Aurobindo, David Bohm, and below, one of the greatest architects, I did my PhD on him, that's Christopher Alexander. Timeless way of building, synthesis of form, pattern language technique, the connection between the large patterns and the smaller patterns. That is exactly the Sankhya Darshana, the connection between large data structures, which is Mahat. The Upanishads call it Mahato Mahoriyan, and the small data structures, which is Aham, which is Anu Anururiyan. So you see some of the greatest things, what you call what we call comparative to cooperative, co-adaptive complex systems, which is a part of ecology, biological science, sustainable development, natural development, ecological economics. It's a common ground of planners, ecologists, biologists, genetic scientists, neurologists. That was actually a discussion between David Bohm and Christopher Alexander, and he reflected the same thoughts which are actually reflected in the Sankhya Darshana of one of the India's greatest philosophers, from where Buddhism also evolved. That's Kapila, Maharshi Kapila, Kapila Vastu, and the same place where many other great avatars and great prophets were born in India. So this is something that we have to understand, something that we have to understand. So that takes us to the whole connection, which is the foundation of India, and that is the Gita 15.1, which talks about the celestial tree, the tree of knowledge. There are two trees. One is the technical tree, the material tree, the tree of life. The other tree is a tree of wisdom, the Bodhi Briksha, Ashwattham, Urdhamulam, the roots are above, and Adhashwakam, the branches are below, and it is Abbayam, it's perennial, like the mountains have perennial snow caps, so the river is perennial, and then the clouds are again going back to the mountains from the sea. So the water cycle, the hydrological cycle is perennial. What is perennial is sustainable. So we have disturbed this perennial hydrological cycle. So this is the tree of knowledge, the tree of cyclicity. So that is the Chandangshi between the highest and the lowest, between the material and the non-material, between the shallow ecological and the deep ecological. And that is Chanda. Like a poetry, you try to rhyme the highest line of the poetry with the lowest line, then you call it a poetry. So somebody who can rhyme the deepest knowledge with the grounded knowledge, he becomes a poet, Kavi Manishi. That's the Isha Upanishad. And he only is actually the Veda Ved. Vedas are not name of books and scriptures. Vedas are universal vibes and vibrations. Sruti, and I mean, they have been written as books, but they're beyond books. They're eternal. That's why it's called Sanatana. I mean, you cannot, I mean, you can take away all the avatars and the gods from India, but nothing happens to Shruti. It's beyond avatars and gods. So that is why Indian dharma, dharayeti dharma, is Sanatana. It's eternal. All other things are secondary. That is Smriti. That is the second level. Smriti means smarter, smart, memory chains, that we see as history, anthropology, archaeology, and all the other things. But primary knowledge is eternal, the cosmic vibration. And this is exactly, so this is the foundation of Indian knowledge system. And I have worked on this a little bit. And this exactly coincides with the neural networking of a human body, where the Urdhamulam is the bulb, the pineal gland, the thalamus, and the other shakam are the neural networking that comes down. So you see, the knowledge tree that is outside is also the knowledge tree which is inside. So when Buddha sits under the Bodhi tree, I mean, the tree has roots below and branches above, but when he's sitting under the Bodhi tree, he has the root above and the branch below. So this is like the matrix and the inverted matrix. So our entire meditation system is a sustainable framework of vision, syntax, semiotics, and semantics. This is iconography. This is Indian sustainable iconography. So everything in India is so deep. It is so unfortunate that only in the Middle Ages to the present time, we lost this connection. But today, again, there's a recovery, and we need a recovery. We need a recovery. So this is what is coming out in various truths. I'll move through this in very fast. A lot of truths are coming with the precision of the equinox. We are able to measure the dates of the Vedas and see the connection, the 26,000 years cycle of the planets. And they are recorded in various parts. Very recently, probably in Konkan district, Sindhudurg, which Deccan College of Archaeology, Pune, and other colleges have discovered a 12,000 BC heliocentric orb of the two solstices and the two equinoxes, with a hint of the swastika, sustayan, which is sustain, going round and round and round, with a purusha in between. This is absolutely fantastic, which shows that about 14,000 years back, India had a sustainable heliocentric, geocentric foundation of truth. So all these stories of Aryan invasion and this and that is absolutely a manipulation. I mean, Indian history is more than 20, 25, 30,000 years old. And that is only a portion of a larger cycle of changes. How many times it has come to India, God only knows. And probably God does not know, because if you know, you yourself become God. You don't need a God in the temple. You become the change that you like to see outside. So this is something which is very, very important. So this is something which was discussed in the Renaissance art between Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle said you need to be grounded, you have to look at profit, but Plato said it's all fine, but you need a higher philosophy, you need a connection. If you don't have that, you lose civilization. Aristotle did not listen, and his disciple Alexander even did not listen to Plato, and Greece was destroyed in 100 years. Today, there was a Greece, there is no Greece. Today, there was an Egypt, there is no Egypt. Today, there was a Renaissance France, there is no France, it's all gone. Today, the rest of the West could be like that. But today, there was, there is, and there shall be a Bharat and India. Why? Because our knowledge system is ultimately connected to the Shrutis, eternal, it's Sanatana. So that is why it is sustainable. So we have to know the deep truths of what makes sustainability. Just not make some calculations, do an SIA and an EIA and submit a report and think it's sustainable. That's all fine, but there is much deeper and it's much bigger than that. So these are some of the thoughts which are developed by Laplace, by Schrodinger, and Werner Heisenberg, and one of the greatest, the father of nanochemistry, that's Ilya Prigogine. All four of them have walked on Indian traditions. They have books on India. That's why I'm showing their picture. And they have talked about the cycles, the same cycles. The hydrological cycle is also the Carnot cycle of the temperature science. So what happens inside a refrigerator because of the compressor also happens outside in the planet, the relationship between the sun and the moon. The four seasons, the four Sankrantis, the two solstices and the two equinoxes are exactly the 4 points of the Carnot cycle in the laws of thermodynamics. And this is the foundation of the Vedas, the secrets of the Vedas by Sri Aurobindo. This is a fantastic book, without which Indian knowledge system does not survive. It's so important to have these books in the pedagogy. So I hope I'm making my points clear. I'll move even faster. So this is what is recognized in the West right now. But we Indians are still skeptical and we are still thinking whether we should. So this knowledge of nonlinear dynamics has been used by a great author, Fritjof Capra, a book which has sold more than 7 million copies in the 80s. And I was there in the US, I got a copy. And today is a Bible of India and the West. And this was again used by Prigogine and Glanstrow for the Nobel Prize book, where they use the symbol of Mahakala, the dynamics of space, time, and causation. And in 2004, Dr. Anil Kakotka, the chairman of DST, was invited by CERN in Switzerland to present a statue of Natarajan, which is essentially from the south, the southern iconography, which shows the relationship between Agni and Soma, the fire and water, Amrita, maintaining the life cycle of the world as a symbol of quantum sciences, quantum physics, quantum chemistry, quantum biology, quantum electrodynamics, and quantum computing, and all that is going to become quantum with AI in the next 5 years and 10 years. So what is so ancient is still so modern. Why? Because Indian knowledge systems, it's essentially sustainable because it has reached the highest to come down to the lowest. There's no other country which has done that. They have just come up to the cultural level, material, moral, cultural, but they have never penetrated the culture to go into the spiritual, the cosmic, the deep ecological system. So these are latest books. I was in the US a few months back. So this is Jose Leduc's. His work is just getting submitted to the Nobel Prize Council. The Four Realms of Existence from Harvard University Press. And this is exactly with the Panchakosha of the Taittiriya Upanishad. So you see what is latest in cognitive sciences, what is latest in cognitive sciences is also the oldest in our Upanishads. And I request all of you, or maybe a few of you, please get this book by Robert Lanza on biocentricism, where it shows that the consciousness, the human Chaitanya, the Atma Deepa Bhava, The light inside is the determinant of the light outside. If you're not enlightened inside, how you are going to enlighten others? I mean, if you're not sustainable and happy inside, if you're not a happy architect or a happy product designer or a fashion designer, how you're going to make others happy? So charity begins with you, and then you talk about. So that is our Upanishad. Attana Mokshathaya, first your salvation, and then Jagat Hitaya. Not the other way. Not the other way. Today, the problem that we are just making conferences and ashrams and dhoom dham and all that, but without improving our own things. The most important thing is to see yourself, watch yourself on the mirror and see, are you a slightly better person than yesterday? Then you have the right to change others. So you be the change that you like to see outside, in the words of Gandhiji. No, this is just not the word of Gandhiji. I think all gurus of India has talked about this. So let me move a little fast. So I'm coming to the last part, I think so, part 3. So these are some of the, so I think I've almost covered everything which I wanted to share with you. So this is a change in the last 130 years, which has actually led to the foundation. But most of the changes were happening in the West. We Indians were not really aware of this. It is only the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years there's a recovery. But the real change happened about in 1893, when Swami Vivekananda took over the world stage in Chicago at 1893. And most of the people who were interested to meet him were not people of religion or spirituality, but they're all scientists like Hermann Helmholtz, physics, Lord Kelvin, electrician, and one of the greatest scientists of the world, Nikola Tesla. So Tesla and Swamiji worked on the relationship between Vedanta and modern physics. And the relationship between the internal world and the external world. This is a brilliant start which happened in Chicago. And that work needs to be studied very deeply. I have no time to explain this. And that really was taken over by a dialogue when Werner Heisenberg came to Kolkata to meet Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore to discuss quantum physics. Can you imagine a quantum physicist coming to Kolkata, India in 1929? With a man who is not a scientist. He's a poet, he is a literature and an art person. I mean, why he should come all the way? So Heisenberg understood that what people are pursuing through machines and algorithms and mathematics in the external laboratory, in India has a different path of pursuing the same truth in mind meditation in the internal laboratory. But the truths which are reached in both the worlds are the same. That is the biggest connection between the internal and external world. This is 1929, and the dialogues are preserved in a book called Uncommon Wisdom. This is also an international bestseller. Millions of copies has been sold worldwide. And that led to the 1930 dialogue between Tagore and Einstein, which is in Berlin. And that's called the role of consciousness in sustainable development. And this was taken over by Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein. And today, it is almost proved, it's going to be proof that at the core of development is not mind and intellect, but at the core of development is the sentient being, the Chaitya Purusha, the conscious being inside. As Swamiji said, every soul is potentially divine. The whole purpose is to make that kinetic and realize that you are that, and that there is inside you. That's the whole connection. So these things have really developed. A big change came at MIT in the 1930s. Norbert Wiener, a friend of Andrew Whitehead, who was a friend of Vivekananda, took that with one of the greatest beginning of what you call computational sciences, that's cybernetics, and he devised 4 states as cybernetics for sustainable sciences. These are very modern concepts. Normally, these are the concepts which must be introduced, and this is what I'm doing with my students, and they're very excited because the students of today, they just don't want to hear Mera Bharat mein ye tha wo tha. They also want to hear so fine ye tha wo tha, but how it is again recovered today in the language of science. That's what the students are interested. So that's why all this work we are doing. That is the whole foundation. Because today's students are very intelligent and they're watching you. They're watching all the teachers and all the speakers. So you have to be. So this is the summary of Indian knowledge systems. I'm not getting into this. One of the most important person here, if you see my cursor, is Dr. Haridas Chaudhary, who took Sri Aurobindo's work to California, and this is how the Californian Integral Studies and Israelian Institute were built, where some of these great minds were born. So you can have a look at this video, Bharat Tirtha YouTube IIT Kharagpur, and know a little more if you're interested. So this really walked, I think I've already explained this slide, which is the connect between the two paradigms of development. I'm sorry, the two paradigms of development, which is going from inside to outside and from outside to inside. So this is a great thing. And then after that, these are some of the things which are taken by three other Nobel laureates like Professor Charles Townes, who came to India at Bigyan Bhavan and talked about the twin evolution, the evolution inside, which is microevolution, and the evolution outside, which is macroevolution, and the relationship between two. And it is that relationship which assures sustainable development. And these are walked in the areas of iconography by Dr. Richard Ernst and Daniel Phillips, two other Nobel laureates, which are so important, So this is actually in the field of arts and social sciences, which is also talking about deep ecology. I think if you have not heard about this term, please scan and study what is deep ecology. That is a new area of sustainable science that is coming up in the West. And then there are works on catharsis, purgation, meditation, improvement of the human mind. Two Nobel laureates, Dr. Hartwell and Dr. Craig Mello, their books on India. And then, of course, yoga, which is one of the most important things in the world right now. There are more yogas and yoga shivirs outside India than we have in India. Yoga is a way of life in the West. We India, we are just doing in the reverse fashion. We are trying to catch our nose in the reverse way after we see that the West is actually falling in love with yoga. And today, yoga is one of the largest intangible heritage of UNESCO. And I mean, in New York itself, there are yoga shivis. Whether that's great and good, that's a second question. But the first question is that there's an universal acceptance of Indian traditions around the world. And there are new areas of sustainable brain science and cognitive networking by Dr. Robert Penrose and Stuart Hameross, which is the orchestrated objective reduction in quantum holism. That means there is actually no objective world. The entire objective world is an ensemble which is finally orchestrated, like a piano comes with a cello, with a guitar, with a flute, and everything becomes one orchestra. That's cybernetics. In the same way, physics comes with chemistry, with spatial planning, with econometrics, with deep learning, and becomes one grand unified science. That's called reduction, which leads to holism. So this is quantum holism, which is the new area of sustainable development right now. I hope you're liking all this, because these are the apertures of tomorrow, the next 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 years. This is where the world is moving right now. So we need to be updated with all these, and see how in all these, the ancient Indian ethos, the ancient Indian metaphysics, the ancient Indian Sanatana Sruti is getting reflected again and again and again. And there, India is rising, in the words of Swami Vivekananda. I mean, it's going to be so great in the future that the glories of the past will be even overshadowed. That was his prediction. Yeah. So now we begin to understand. And this is, I think I'll end with this too, and then I'll have a few ending slides. So in 2007, the pranayam, the circadian chakra, the biological clock of rising with the sun and going to dinner with the setting of the moon, everything is disturbed. We have our dinner at 11:30, 12 o'clock, 1:30, and then we develop acidity, we develop lifestyle diseases. Why? Because the internal world is disconnected with the external. That's called the circadian rhythm. The Rechak and the Purak, the Kumbhak, which is a foundation of Raj Yoga, for thousands and thousands of years, that has become the Nobel Prize of 2017, where three great scientists, Jeffrey Hall and others, have realized the ancient Indian science using structural genetic algorithm. So it is a Nobel Prize. And the other Nobel Prize in 2022 is Space, Time, and Causation, which is the quantum handshake, which is, I'll try to explain in a simple way. I don't know whether I'll be successful, When a teacher is coming to the class, like Albert Einstein, and speaking to ordinary students like us, Einstein remembers one day I was a student listening to someone else. So he goes to the past, become a student to make things simple for us. A teacher like Albert Einstein. On the one hand. On the other hand, a student like us looks at Albert Einstein and tries to become another Einstein in the future by moving in the future. So the final thing that's happening in the class is a combination of Einstein coming to the past and becoming a student to make us understand what he is saying, and we trying to understand Einstein and become an Einstein in the future. So the past and the future is encapsulated, it's handshaken, it's entanglement, it's coming together. So this is modern science, quantum physics, and it is absolutely proving the foundation of Indian sustainable space-time and causation, which is Trikalagya. The three faces of Mahakala. Now we understand what these three faces are. And then we have the fourth phase, which is Abhat, and there's a fifth phase, which is transcendental, and then there's a sixth phase, which is Kartik, which is a baby Shiva, Murugan, Subramaniam. He comes down back to the world. So these phases are just not hypothetical ideas. They're all language of sciences. It's so important to understand all this. So these are the books which has come up in the latest time, which really shakes hand. So that takes us to the understanding of semantics and syntaxes of design, which is so very important. And that also takes us to understand the two sides of reality. I'll just finish in 5 minutes. How you formulate the words. That's called pattern language. This is what Christopher Alexander. So it's APP, which means app, and then it becomes apple. But it could mean an apple which is there in the garden. It could be also meaning an apple which is eaten but used by Steve Jobs for Apple computers. So these are different semiotics, but using the same semantics based on the elements of design, which is the syntax. So computational science and design science are following the same rules. So there's only one truth in the world which governs design, whether somebody is working on data and somebody is working with walls and cements and plasters and sewage lines and inspection pits and clarifoculators or oxidation pools and pisciculture and the backyards of a city. You're working with the same design language. So when you're working with the same universal design language, only then development becomes sustainable, not before that. So one of the biggest tasks that we have is to understand the apple, which is the Adam's apple. And the Adam's apple is also the Nilkant of the Shiva. So now we understand what exactly, so that is the Vishuddha Chakra, the fifth chakra, below which it is Rajasic and Tamasic, and above which it is Sattvic. So the gunas and the biological formation of the body and the two serpents integrated to form the flight of the bird, the yogi, are concepts which are so ancient and so modern as shown in the movie Avatar. I hope I'm able to explain at least a little bit to all of you. And this is the language of sustainable development, from syntax to semantics, and from semantics to semiotics. Okay, so let's move on. So this is the whole understanding of nonlinear dynamics. This slide I can again start explaining, but I think I've already done that. And I'm sure I'm addressing a very expert audience, so everybody's getting me. So this is actually the 1981 Nobel Prize of Roger Walcott Sperry, the left-hand side of the brain and the right-hand side of the brain, which is actually the foundation of the left-wing current and the right-wing current, the efferent and the afferent, which is also the foundation of yoga. And the yogi, what he does, he combines the two currents and takes the middle path and hits the spinal cord and goes beyond. So that is a whole mysticism. There's nothing mystic about it. The only thing is it's very hard to achieve that. So that's why it remains. So when I'm in class 3, if I talk about a PhD with a student who is doing a PhD, it's mystical because I'm not fit to do a PhD because I am in class 3. So I have to go to class 5, I have to go to class 7, I have to go to the college level to understand the PhD students. Then it's no more mystical, it's science. So mysticism is a wrong word. It only unravels. My progression becomes sustainable if a knowledge hierarchy, a pattern language technique, a pattern network of an unfolding and an enfolding order is actually provided in my educational pedagogy. That is missing in the reductionist paradigm of pedagogy. So that's why we are disconnected and we don't like each other and we are fighting. So from there, we have to move to connections and symbiosis. That is the foundation of sustainable development. So these are some of the people, the polymaths who could see both sides, from Plato to Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose to Leonardo da Vinci and to Maharshi Kapila, Kekule, who from a serpent embrace, the serpent eating its tail, he actually discovered the foundations of organic chemistry. So he connected the dream world with the logical world. That's called a polymath. So our education must connect the internal world and the external world. That is missing. A student of music must talk with a student of physics. A student of city planning must talk with a student of cognitive sciences. A student of history must talk with a student of deep learning. Then only education progresses and becomes sustainable, not a day before that. Not a day before that. Okay, so I think, so these are some of the things which are coming up. Deep ecological, biocentric centricism in nature. And I think other speakers may be touching this. That's the foundation of a sustainable systems thinking. So I've been talking about systems thinking in the last 35 years. We need to bring and look at things as a system, not in factors, but from factor driven, it has to become systems driven. That is, then only we'll be able to connect the ecosystems and the community. And then it has to be automated, self-sustained, and then only it will become a sustainable thing. So this is a beautiful saying by Rappaport. When I was a student at IIT Kharagpur doing my UG, Amos Rappaport came to IIT Kharagpur and was with us for 6 months. That time I did not understand much what he said, but today I know what he said. He said one changes rather than changing the environment. And when you change and become a slightly better human being, then you are able to change the environment much better. Otherwise, you do the same mistake that you have committed inside. If you're right inside, you'll do the right thing outside. So it is the inside that shapes the outside. That is the key, the master key to sustainable development. So these are some of the things, my last 15 years, a lot of collaborations around the world, very personal, a lot of meeting with different people. You can see Dr. Murali Mohan Joshi and AP Kanvinde. He came to my exhibition about 25 years back in Delhi. And that's Dr. Murali Mohan Joshi and all that. So I got a inspiration of a lot of people. Nothing happened in a day. It's about last 25 years of work when nobody knew about IKS and other things. But today it is a big thing. And today people are trying to recover. We had collaborations with Japan. And these are some of my books which I have written. Just a few months back, we had in Pondicherry on a literature festival. Sanjeev Sanyal was with me in the same session. And we are doing some networking, hopefully in Southeast Asia. I was a few months there. And just 2 months back, 3 months back, I was in Cambridge at MIT and Tufts. And we had a very syncretic session on the kind of things which I just shared with you in the last 45, 50 minutes. So to sum up, from hegemony and conflict of a divided world of inside and outside, we have to move to harmony and complementarity. That alone has to be value driven. So the mathematics that we do has to be value driven, and the ecology that we practice has to be deep. That is the key to sustainable development. So when we put our data into a structural equation modeling, or we are doing an eigenvector matrix analysis, it's just not numbers. Every number has a value. It's like A plus BI, which is equal to C, a complex number. Normally, we just care about that A. What about that BI, which is the imaginary portion? So in our education pedagogy, we have to also compute the intangible variable and do an heuristic algorithm on that. Then only you will be able to realize how the whole package of a planning prescription becomes sustainable. Then we are able to bridge the left and the right, the logical with the random, the sequential with the intuitive, the rational with the holistic, the analytical with the synthesizing, the objective with the subjective, and the looking at parts with the looking at wholes. This is the foundation to sustainable development. Then you have both the wings. And when you have both the wings, then the bird can soar high. Then the flight of knowledge becomes sustainable. Then you move from class 1 to class 10, from class 10 to bachelor's, from bachelor's to master's, from master's to PhD, postdoc. And then on the other hand, you come back to schools and colleges like Albert Einstein and Richard Feynman came back as a nice teacher and talking to the generations of tomorrow. So the past is shaping the future. The future is also shaping the past. That's quantum. That's the Indian tradition. So what is actually latest in modern sciences, the most modern of sciences, is the Rishi Pragya, the deep knowledge systems of our ancient rishis for thousands, the Sapta rishis and all the rishis after that, for thousands and thousands of years. So today, despite the commotions and the troubles on the surface, we are actually reaching the next cycle, the next golden age, maybe in a century or a little more than that. So all this decomposition will go away, but we may have to pay some price because if we start late. So our educational pedagogy, the way we think and the way we practiced must be bridged with this deepest algorithm. So with this, I raise, so you have to understand the knowledge tree, both as a tree outside and as a tree inside of networks, the graph theory behind the tree. That is the key to environmental conservation and sustainable development. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope I made some sense to you.